Chapter 5. Descent into Madness. The fluorescent lights of the high school cafeteria buzzed overhead, a relentless, anemic hum that mirrored the frantic static in Jake Foster's mind. It was Friday 23rd, and the air crackled with a tension that went beyond the usual lunchtime clamor of clanking trays, boisterous laughter, and the indistinguishable thrum of 100 adolescent conversations. For Jake, second lunch had become a battlefield, a place where his internal struggles often erupted into agonizing public displays. Things hadn't been good for a while, but today they were catastrophic. The cafeteria, usually a vibrant kaleidoscope of youthful energy, felt like a pressure cooker to Jake. The cacophony of voices, the clatter of cutlery, the sharp tang of mystery meat and overcooked vegetables, each sensation pricked at his overstimulated nerves, building a subtle, insidious friction beneath his skin. He saw the world in vivid, overwhelming detail, a relentless assault on his senses that most people filtered effortlessly. Every fleeting expression on a passerby's face, every whispered comment, every shifting shadow, they all contributed to the storm brewing inside him, a swirling vortex of unarticulated fears and anxieties. It had all begun with Evelyn Reynolds, his lifeline since 9th grade. She sat across from him, her usually bright eyes clouded with a weary kind of affection, a testament to the emotional toll his struggles had taken on her. Leo, his younger brother, was at a nearby table with his own friends, but his gaze still drifted towards Jake, a silent sentinel of concern. They had been discussing the fallout of his latest meltdown, the kind that left him feeling frayed and desperate, raw and exposed. He hadn't meant for it to happen, but the words had tumbled out, ill-formed and jagged, leaving a trail of confusion and hurt in their wake. Evelyn, ever the pragmatist, had tried to reason with him, to nudge him away from the edge gently. Her voice was a soft balm against the jagged edges of his thoughts, but even her kindness felt like a burden today. "You okay, Jake?" she'd asked, her voice laced with that familiar, almost mournful affection. "You've barely touched your food." The tray before him, piled high with a rubbery slice of pizza and limp green beans, felt like an insurmountable obstacle. The smell alone turned his stomach. Jake avoided eye contact, his gaze fixed on the crumpled napkin he was meticulously tearing into smaller and smaller pieces. The rough texture was a small grounding comfort in a world that felt increasingly out of his control. He mumbled under his breath, the words barely audible over the din. "They can't understand. No one can understand." Leo, perhaps sensing the shift in the conversation, abandoned his own lunch and moved closer, pulling up a chair beside Evelyn. His 14-year-old face, usually alight with a sharp wit, was creased with an uncharacteristic seriousness. "Understand what, Jake?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Jake tensed, his hands clenching into fists, the napkin scraps scattering to the floor. The simple question, meant to bridge a chasm, felt like an intrusion, a demand for answers he didn't possess. About everything," he responded, his voice a tight knot of frustration. "The thoughts, they won't stop." He gestured vaguely to his head, as if trying to physically dislodge the ceaseless chaotic monologue that played on an endless loop in his mind. The thoughts were not just words. They were images, sounds, sensations, all blending into a terrifying symphony of dread and confusion. They were a constant, suffocating weight. Evelyn leaned forward, her expression softening with concern, her gaze unwavering. She had seen this spiral before, had tried to anchor him countless times. "You have to talk to someone." Her words trailed off, hinting at the professional help they'd all been urging him towards. But Jake heard only the echoes of past fears. His voice began to rise, the carefully constructed dam against his internal torrent starting to crack. "No, they just want to lock me up," Control me. The words burst out, raw and panicked. He imagined sterile rooms, cold stares, the feeling of being caged, his autonomy stripped away. It was a primal fear, born of a lifetime of feeling misunderstood and manipulated by a world that didn't play by his rules. Leo, ever the steady counterpoint to Jake's volatile emotions, tried to interject, his voice firm but gentle. They just want you to feel better, Jake. Dad cares about you. Evelyn cares about you. I care about you. He listed them, a litany of love, hoping to reach past the anger, to the vulnerable core he knew was there. But the words, meant to be a lifeline, landed like a punch to Jake's gut. His breath hitched. Tears, hot and stinging, welled in his eyes, blurring the already chaotic landscape of the cafeteria. The love, the care, it was too much, too heavy, too conditional on him being fixed. It only amplified his sense of inadequacy, his failure to be the person they wanted him to be. Emily, his friend, a fragile construct of his mind, was the only person who seemed to understand him fully. She was the one who listened without judgment, whose gentle voice was a balm against the storm. The thought of her being hurt, her delicate world shattering because of him, because of his endless struggles, was too much to bear. He was a protector, not a destroyer. He was supposed to keep Emily safe, not endanger her with his chaos. A black rage surged through him then, hot and consuming, fueled by his inability to communicate, to make sense of the confusing world around him. It was a desperate, despairing fury, born of helplessness. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to make the internal noise stop, to silence the relentless cacophony in his head. I don't want to, but it would make it stop. The pain, Jake said, the words barely a whisper, yet infused with a chilling clarity. His eyes, now wide and bloodshot, held a terrifying emptiness, a look Evelyn recognized with a jolt of ice in her veins. She instantly understood his unspoken meaning. Jake, don't talk like that, Evelyn pleaded, her voice sharp with fear. She reached across the table, her hand hovering, unsure if touching him would help or make things worse. Emily would be traumatized. She loves you so much. Your dad would lose everything if you did. Her voice cracked on the last words, the sheer terror of the implication making her stomach clench. She tried to invoke the ones he loved, the anchors in his turbulent world, hoping to pull him back from the precipice. Jake's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a dangerous mix of pain and fury. The mention of Emily, the idea of her being better off, twisted something vital inside him. This was not about Emily being traumatized. This was about freeing her from his burden. She would be better off, Jake shouted, the words ripping from his throat, raw and anguished. Everyone would. He slammed his fist on the table, the cutlery jumping with a metallic clatter, his lunch tray sliding precariously. The sudden violent outburst, echoing through the cavernous space, cut through the cafeteria noise like a knife. All nearby students' eyes were on them now. The whispers died, the laughter ceased, a pocket of silence formed around their table, growing outward like a ripple in a pond. Jake didn't hear the words form in his mind as he spoke. All he felt was a searing anger at the world and its unfairness, a world that constantly threatened to take everything from him, to overwhelm him, to suffocate him. The overwhelming pressure in his head, the buzzing, the frantic internal dialogue, it all coalesced into a single desperate desire for cessation. Then maybe I should just do it, he'd snarled, his voice dripping with an angry desperation he barely understood, the words a desperate cry for release, for control, for an end to the ceaseless struggle. Maybe then everyone would stop trying to fix me. Maybe then everyone will finally leave me alone. His voice rose, raw and ragged with emotion, cracking on the edge of a sob. I'll do it right here, right now, right in front of you. He wasn't thinking of the act itself, not really, but of the absolute final silence it promised, the end of the never-ending fight within his own head. The cafeteria noise around them seemed to vanish entirely. The silence was not peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, thick with shock and horror. Evelyn's eyes widened. The playful light that usually danced within them extinguished, replaced with something akin to raw terror. It was like watching a sun dimming behind a thick cloud, plunging her into an unforeseen darkness. Her lunch tray clattered to the floor, forgotten, unnoticed, amidst the horrifying tableau unfolding before her. The plastic container of fruit salad burst open, scattering grapes and melon onto the tiled floor. A splash of vibrant color against the drab surroundings, utterly out of place. "Jake, no!" Leo had shouted from the nearby table, his voice sharp and laced with a primal panic. He had instinctively moved towards his brother, his protectiveness overriding any fear. Leo had always held a strange balance of patience and protectiveness towards his older brother, a quiet understanding that few others possessed. But this was different. This was a line Jake had never crossed, a threat that went beyond his usual desperate cries for help. This was real. Time stretched. Every second, an agonizing eternity. The faces of the students around them were frozen in various stages of shock. Open mouths, wide eyes, hands pressed to chests. Jake stood frozen. The bravado he'd so desperately clung to dissolving into a chilling realization of what he had just threatened. A cold wave of clarity washed over him as the black rage began to recede, leaving behind an emptiness worse than the anger. He had meant it. At the moment, in the throes of that uncontrollable fury, he had meant it. But now the reality of those words crashed down on him, a tidal wave of shame and self-loathing so potent it threatened to drown him. The image of the cafeteria, suddenly so quiet and watchful, burned itself into his mind. Jake, Evelyn's voice, once so confident, so steady, was now a fragile whisper, trembling with a mix of fear and concern, a sound that tore at his already battered heart. The look in her eyes, the raw, unfiltered terror, was no less than a physical blow, worse than any punch. He had hurt her. He had terrified her. And he'd done it with his own pain, using his deepest despair as a weapon. I didn't mean, he stammered, his voice losing its fight, becoming small and childlike. He couldn't finish the thought, couldn't articulate the instant crushing regret. He saw the lines etched deeper around her mouth, the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. He had done this. He, the person she had dedicated years to protecting and understanding, had managed to inflict a wound so deep, so profound, that he feared it would never heal. The cruelty of his words echoed in his mind, magnifying his own distress, transforming into a relentless self-reproach. It was like watching a reflection of his darkest thoughts play out before him, a stark reminder of the monster he sometimes felt he was becoming, a monster made of fear and misunderstanding. The shame was a burning brand, searing his soul. The aftermath was a blur of hurried conversations, stern faces, and the suffocating silence of being led to the nurse's office. The walk felt endless, each step a heavy confession. He could feel the eyes of his peers burning into his back, hear the hushed whispers that followed him like a shadow. He was no longer just Jake. He was the kid who had a meltdown, the one who threatened. The labels were invisible, but they branded him nonetheless. In the small, sterile confines of the nurse's office, the air was thick with unspoken words and the faint scent of antiseptic. Jake sat slumped in a chair, his gaze fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Across from him sat Mr. Davis, a kind and patient counselor whose usual gentle demeanor was now tinged with a deep, professional concern. John, Jake's father, sat beside him, his face etched with worry lines that seemed to deepen with every passing second. Leo stood awkwardly by the door, his arms crossed, a silent, watchful presence, his youthful face a mask of conflict, fear for his brother, frustration at his actions, and the profound sadness of seeing Jake so utterly lost. "Jake, you understand the seriousness of what happened, right?" Mr. Davis asked, his voice low and steady, a deliberate calm in the storm. "Threatening self-harm it's not okay." He chose his words carefully, trying to convey the gravity of the situation without pushing Jake further into himself. Jake remained silent, picking at the frayed hem of his shirt, his fingers working tirelessly, meticulously unraveling the fabric, as if his own coherence depended on it. His mind was a tempest of sound and fury, 1,000 thoughts screaming for release, yet he found himself utterly unable to form a single coherent sentence. The words were there, hovering just beyond his grasp, but they wouldn't coalesce, wouldn't obey. John placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, a gesture of quiet support. Jake flinched slightly at the contact, the touch feeling like an invasive weight, rather than solace. He's been struggling lately," John said, his voice husky with emotion, speaking for his son. "We're trying to help him." His eyes, usually so resilient, were filled with a profound sadness, a paternal helplessness. He loved his son fiercely, but this struggle felt beyond his grasp, a dark current pulling Jake away. A suicide watch had been imposed, a heavy, invisible weight around Jake's neck. One more misstep, one more threat, and the consequences would be dire: expulsion, permanent grounding, and the shattering of any remaining trust with his family and friends forever. The weight of it felt like a concrete slab pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. He was a ticking time bomb, and they were scrambling to defuse him. He was drowning, and all they seemed to offer was a weighted life jacket, heavy and cumbersome, threatening to pull him further down. "We need to ensure his safety, and you need to ensure his safety as well, John," Mr. Davis reiterated, his gaze firm, conveying the institutional responsibility. John nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. He looked over at Jake with gentle concern. "Buddy, why didn't you tell me you felt like this?" he asked, his voice a soft plea, a desperate father reaching out. Jake flinched at his words, still avoiding all eye contact. Tell him what? How could he explain the ceaseless barrage of thoughts, the terror of judgment, the shame of not being normal? He didn't respond. The silence stretched, heavy and profound. "He doesn't like to talk about stuff, Dad," Leo replied, stepping forward slightly, speaking on behalf of his brother, a silent bridge. Leo understood the unspoken, the difficulty Jake had with articulation. Mr. Davis looked at John, his expression regretful but firm. "I'll need you to set up an appointment with a therapist as soon as you can," he said. "We're doing everything on our end to provide support, but professional help is crucial here." "I will, thank you," John said, his voice barely a whisper, the gravity of the situation settling even deeper upon him. He knew this was just the beginning. Back in class, the lessons washed over him, meaningless sounds, in a world that had suddenly become terrifyingly real. Mrs. Peterson's droning voice about algebraic equations was an indistinguishable hum. The bright overhead lights, once just a minor annoyance, now felt like a buzzing amplifier in his head. Each flicker a sharp jab. His ears rang, a dull, persistent tone that drowned out everything else. Each ticking of the clock on the classroom wall was a hammer blow to his consciousness, marking the slow, agonizing passage of time, counting down to something he didn't understand but feared. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, the thick walls built with fear, misunderstandings, and a desperate yearning for something, anything he couldn't quite grasp. The world outside the cage felt threatening, unpredictable. The world inside was equally terrifying, a chaotic landscape of his own warring thoughts and emotions. He yearned for the comforting presence of Emily, but even she seemed distant, her gentle voice muffled by the storm raging within him, her form shimmering at the edge of his perception, just out of reach. He was alone, utterly alone in a world that felt too big, too confusing, and too dangerous. When the ringing bell finally signaled the end of the school day, its shrill cry a painful echo in his ears, Leo sought out Evelyn amidst the stream of students. He found her by her locker, meticulously organizing her books, her movements precise, almost mechanical. Her usual vibrant energy was conspicuously absent. "Evelyn, are you okay?" Leo asked, his voice tentative, a quiet probe into her carefully constructed composure. She managed a weak, almost imperceptible smile, a mere twitch of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, just freaked out," she replied, her voice shaky, betraying the fragile facade. "I've never seen Jake like that." "Not like that." Her gaze drifted, unfocused, reliving the horrifying scene. "I just wanted to help him." "I know, me too," Leo said, his own voice heavy with shared burden. He understood her helplessness, the overwhelming desire to fix something that felt irrevocably broken. "I keep thinking about what he said," Evelyn confessed, her voice dropping to a whisper, as if speaking the words aloud might give them more power. "What if—" "I can't let that happen, Leo. I just can't." The unspoken dread hung in the air between them, a tangible weight. The image of Jake's face, contorted in despair, the chilling threat, was seared into her memory. They stood in silence then, the weight of their shared fear settling upon them. It was a silence filled with the clatter of lockers, the shouts of other students, the sounds of a bustling high school. But for them, it was an island of foreboding, a quiet understanding of the precarious precipice Jake teetering upon. That evening, the silence in the Foster household was heavy with unspoken words, a thick, suffocating blanket that pressed down on them all. Dinner was a muted affair, punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery, each sound amplified in the oppressive quiet. Jake picked at his food, the taste and texture foreign and unpleasant, his stomach a knot of anxiety. He could see the worry etched on his father's face, the exhaustion in John's eyes as he stared blankly at his plate, lost in thought. John's attempts at normal conversation, strained and quickly abandoned, only made the silence more profound. Leo, usually a whirlwind of questions and quips, was subdued, his earlier youthful exuberance replaced by a quiet watchfulness, his gaze frequently flicking towards Jake, filled with an uncharacteristic solemnity. They were all walking on eggshells around him, afraid to say the wrong thing, afraid to cause another explosion, to reignite the terrifying spark that had flared so dangerously in the cafeteria. Jake felt like a burden, a broken, defective thing that had shattered the fragile peace of his family. His inability to explain himself, to articulate the storm within, only compounded his isolation. He longed for the comforting presence of Emily, his only true confidant, but even though she seemed distant, her gentle voice muffled by the storm raging within him, her image blurry at the edges of his mind. He was alone, utterly and completely alone, in a world that felt too big, too confusing, and too dangerous. The love of his family, once a source of comfort, now felt like a heavy chain, binding him to a reality he couldn't navigate, a responsibility he couldn't fulfill. He was failing them all. As the day came to an end, the echoes of light that had once illuminated his world, Evelyn's unwavering smile, Leo's playful jabs, even the comforting, quiet presence of his father, began to fade into shadows, consumed by the encroaching darkness. The cafeteria scene replayed in his mind in a relentless loop. Evelyn's horrified face, the raw terror in her eyes, his own despair, the terrible, unforgivable words he had shouted. He saw how the darkness had already begun to creep in, a deceitfully quiet but deeply foreboding presence, laying the foundation for a struggle far greater than he had ever predicted, a struggle that threatened to consume him whole. And as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the incessant buzzing of the school lights replaced by the ringing in his ears, he felt it. The cold tendrils of true isolation wrapping around him, pulling him deeper into a silence that was not peace. He could never understand why a creature like Vargoth would find him so easy to target.